Godhood, that exclusive club where the membership fees includes a lord, a portal, and, buckets of blood. Hello, fellow Tarnished. Ever wondered what the real cost of divine ascension in the lands between really is? Well, I did. Today we are unraveling the celestial tapestry of Elden Ring to reveal just what it takes to ascend from mere Empyrean to divine status. Stick around as we uncover where all those grim sacrifices for Miquella and Ranni ascension come from. So let's get started. And yes, something I've been thinking about a lot lately is how exactly do you become a god? I mean, Elden Ring throws us a ton of conflicting lore about godhood, and honestly, what the hell is even going on? We've got a few examples of those who made the cut, our lovely candidates for godhood. Let's break them down real quick. So, first of all, we have Marika, the one and only. She's our fave god, the one responsible for a whole lot of drama. But how did she get there? We all kind of know that more or less, but we'll get into that later anyway. Then we have the previous god. Yeah, there was someone before Marika, some dragon god who fled. We know he existed, and we know he fled, because of course he did. But really, what's the story here? Then we have our loved, hated Miquella, the eternally youthful demigod. He also made his way to godhood, even though we eventually have to put an end to that too. Poor guy didn't even get to stretch out his divine wings before, well, you know the rest. And finally, Ranni. Now, here's where things get tricky. Ranni is not your traditional lens between God as we know it, but if you play your cards right, she's totally ascending by the end of the game. Different path, same end result. We then also have some clues about how one might ascend to godhood in Elden Ring. And from what we've gathered so far, it's apparently a 1,000-year voyage, a delightful little nugget that both Miquella and Ranni reference once they become gods.
I promise you, 1,000-year voyage guided by compassion.
1,000-year voyage under the wisdom of the moon.
These two are the only living gods we come across in the game, which makes their words pretty important to us. And so, here's the thing. What about the dragon's god? Did he expire after his 1,000-year lease was up? Maybe he didn't flee after all. Maybe he was just out of date, like a divine subscription that didn't got renewed. So is this 1,000-year journey some kind of deadline? Or perhaps a cycle? Could today be the grand finale of Marika's 1,000-year reign, and that's why she called us back? Not for some epic godhood end party, but more like, hey, guess what? Time's to reset the clock for another 1,000 years. Yay! Maybe she's simply at the end of her cycle and needs things to start over. Who knows? But what we do know now is that this whole godhood thing comes with a 1,000-year timer, whatever that means. Now, here's something else we know about becoming a god. Apparently, you don't necessarily have to slay the previous god. Miquella seems to have managed to ascend without taking down Marika, Radagon, Elden Beast trio thing, or anyone else for that matter. So, how's that possible? Two gods? Anyway, what is clear is that if you want to be a god, you definitely need a lord. This whole godhood thing isn't a solo gig apparently. You've got to have someone to do all the heavy lifting for you. We've got a few options here. Marika needs a lord after all the other lords we already know about, and guess what? That's us. Well done, Tarnished. You've been hired. Ranni? Yes, she also needs a lord, and yes, we can be hers too if we feel like going for the moonlit god vibe. And Miquella? Well, Miquella isn't exactly offering us a job because he's already got his own lord in mind, a mix of Radagon's soul and Mohg body or something equally complicated. And let's not forget the dragons. They had their own lord at some point as well, though they're keeping the lore situation a bit more mysterious. Now, here's something even more surprising. You don't need an Elden Ring to become a god. Miquella and maybe even Ranni managed just fine without one. So it's safe to say the Elden Ring is more of a connection to the greater will, maybe. And now the most important part of becoming a god, you need blood. A lot of blood. But wait, I hear you say, Marika had plenty of blood at her ascension party, but Ranni and Miquella didn't, right? Well, what if I told you they did? And not just a little, a lot. Let's break it down by looking at what happened to these two siblings fighting over godhood. But before we move on, if you want to hear me blabbing more about Elden Ring lore, just hit the subscribe button. You know, it's faster than surviving a Malenia fight and it helps me out way more than you think. So go ahead, make both of our lives better. Hit subscribe. Now, let's dive back into the lore and explore what it really takes to become a god. And let's start with Marika. Well, it's kinda easy, right? We all know more or less the story by now. First, Marika picks her outer god to serve, the Greater Will. However she did this doesn't matter, we know she's tied to the Greater Will. We know this because she's got the Elden Ring, the sparkly piece of jewelry sent by none other than the Greater Will itself. It's her direct connection, like some cosmic Wi-Fi linking her to the greater powers beyond, apparently. Next up, she picks her lord, Godfrey. Now, here's where things got interesting. In Miquella's case, we see a similar thing going on, where Marika seems to enjoy mixing body and soul like it's some divine cocktail hour. She used the Horaloo, warrior's body, and someone else's soul was tossed into the mix somewhere. But who was really what? Honestly, we don't know for sure, and for now, does it even matter? All we need to know is that Marika had a lord to complement her godhood. And finally, the key ingredient to ascend to godhood, blood. A lot of it. We're talking about sacrifices on a scale you really don't want to imagine. And bodies, sure, they're left behind, just chilling. But it's the souls that really matter in this whole equation. The bodies may still be hanging around as gross reminders, but the souls, well, they went somewhere. Maybe they're the fuel for this whole god-making business. And so now we've got Marika's story down. Honestly, it's been talked about a lot. There's no shortage of drama in her journey, from betrayals to power grabs. But at the end of the day, she did it. She became a god. Good job, Marika. Moving on. Let's breeze through the dragons for a second. We don't know too much about what happened with them, but we can piece together a few facts. First off, their god. Yeah, that one fled. I've speculated before that it might have been Metyr, but honestly, for this story, it doesn't really matter. What we do know is there was a lord. Good old Placidusax. And where is he now? Still hanging around. Literally, in his living room in Faramazula. Chill guy, just waiting for, well, who knows what. And the sacrifice? This is where things get juicy. If we take a trip to Faramazula, we are immediately hit with, well, a whole lot of bodies everywhere. It's basically a graveyard with some architectural flair. Many of these bodies are decked out in jewelry, which kind of gives off the sacrificial vibe. Like, did they just throw a big party, then offered up everyone as sacrifices? Maybe, maybe not. Oh, and as if that wasn't enough, we also see dragons literally embedded into the stone. Yeah, that's the thing. Were they sacrifices too? Part of some other plot? Honestly, I'm not entirely sure, and it doesn't matter too much here. We've got enough bodies to satisfy the godhood bloodlust, and hey, we've got some dragons thrown into the mix, just in case too. Alright, moving on to Miquella. Now, this one's a little trickier. His journey to godhood might have been more hidden, but it's kind of in plain sight once you put the pieces together. First of all, Miquella doesn't seem to serve any specific god. He's more ambitious, or maybe just stubborn. He doesn't rely on a ring like Marika. Then we get to the lord situation. Does Miquella have a lord? Well, yeah, we helped with that too. We handed over both the body and soul on a golden plate for his ascension. Now, the blood and sacrifice, oh, that's where things get really dark. And this is where Mohg and the Halig tree come in. Every time I talk about the Halig tree, a place that's supposed to be peaceful, serene, it ends up leading to something really grim. The Halig tree, the sanctuary for the forgotten, yeah, forgotten, as in the ones no one will care about if they disappear. These are the ones no one will look for, an easy group to take advantage of, wouldn't you agree? Let's back that up a little. Point 1. What if those cocoons we see in the Halik tree, the ones that are meant to hold the creatures to whom Miquella promised resurrection or salvation, whatever way you want to put it, what if these cocoons, this transition, was just a cover-up, a convenient excuse for a much darker plot? What if Miquella was collecting bodies through the tree and the cocoons, promising new life, while in reality was using them for something far more sinister? The trees, as we know, absorb death and give life. It's a clean, less direct way of doing what Marika did. Miquella's hands stay clean, but it's just as dark. Point 2. When Miquella went into his cocoon to continue his plan and reach the land of shadow, Mog took over. He kept feeding Miquella, literally blood and death, ensuring that his twisted ascension continued. So Mog wasn't just some soulless vessel, he was also the one providing the bodies and death for the ritual. So Miquella's path to godhood might not have been as picturesque as Marika's, but the pieces all fall into place once you dig a little deeper. He doesn't align himself with an outer god, but rather forges his own path, not bound to the Elden Ring. We helped set up his lordship by offering up the body and souls, thanks to Mog, the Lord of Blood, and the Halik tree with its serene facade masked something darker, a sanctuary for the forgotten and neglected, who were easy to sacrifice for Miquella's purpose. They even went to the Halik tree of their own will. Wait, maybe. And when Miquella retreated into his cocoon, Mog continues feeding him with the blood and death needed for his godhood, a twisted ascension, but one that followed his own grim logic. And now we arrived at our beloved Ranni. Ranni's journey to godhood was, in a way, smoother than others, but don't be fooled, she made a complete mess of things too. Her path is steeped in ancient betrayal and rebellion, and I think she had some serious back from the Nox. These guys were working for her, helping to set the stage for her ascension. How do we know this? Well, it's all tied to Ranni's plan to bring about the Age of Stars. And guess who else was all about that? The Nox. There's this line from the lore that spells it out pretty clear. Long ago, the Nox invoked the ire of the Greater Will, and were banished deep underground. Now they live under a false night sky, in eternal anticipation of their liege, of the coming age of the stars, and their Lord of Night. See that? In eternal anticipation of their liege, that's Ranni. She is the one they were waiting for all this time. The Nox were banished by the Greater Will, probably because they were plotting against it and they tried to bring on a new age, one of their own. So once they got caught by the Greater Will and banished underground, they didn't just roll over and accept it. No. Another key element we need to discuss about the Nox is their role in building a lord. They weren't just sitting underground twiddling their thumbs, they were hard at work trying to forge the perfect lord for their cause. How do we know this? The Mimic tier gives us a big clue. Here's what it says. Mimic tiers are the results of an attempt by the Eternal City to forge a lord. We are plainly told they were building a lord. And now that we travel the Land of Shadow, we know what a lord is needed for, to usher in a new god. It all fits perfectly. But this plan didn't work out for Ranni and the Nox. No, the Greater Will found out about their plot and zapped their whole civilization underground, halting Ranni's plans. Then along comes the Tarnished, you, me, us, all life savior for Ranni's plan at this point. Why? Because we have the will, the drive, and we're ready to follow her into the Age of Stars. Plus, the Nox have been banished underground by the Greater Will, so any attempt from their side to rise again probably wouldn't go over too well. Now, let's dive into the Age of Stars, shall we? So, Ranni's entire goal is to usher in a new age, but she is up against the controlling force of the Greater Will, which is all about maintaining the current order. As an Empyrean, Ranni was actually a god candidate chosen by the Greater Will, likely to follow the traditional path of being bound to the Elden Ring and the Earth Tree. She even had her two fingers, who were there to guide her towards the destined path. And as with any god candidate, she would need a lord. Now, here's where things get too interesting. What if that lord, planned for her by the greater will, was originally meant to be Godwyn? Think about it. Ranni might have been intended to follow the same path as Marika, taking a lord chosen by the greater will and becoming another puppet of its influence. But Ranni, being Ranni, had other plans. By killing Godwyn, she not only removed her designated lord, but also severed their connection to the greater will's control, ensuring that she wouldn't be forced to become their god. So she goes full rebellion, killing Godwyn, destroying her body to avoid bearing the Elden Ring, and eventually destroying her two fingers, the very entities meant to guide her into submission under the Greater Will's plan. It's a brilliant move if you think about it, removing every single thread that could tie her to a future she wanted no part of. Now, there's this lingering theory that some people hold. What if Miquella's lord was supposed to be Godwyn? Well, considering both Ranni and Godwyn are older, maybe they were originally meant to be paired together by the greater will, and Miquella's attachment to Godwyn is simply brotherly love. It's possible that Miquella's great lengths to try and revive Godwyn were more about this sibling connection rather than any romantic or political motivation. Maybe Godwyn's death, combined with Malene's affliction, were the sparks that ignited Miquella's own plans to start his age of compassion. Now, back to Ranni's story. She has her god plan and she has her lord, but what about the other crucial element we've talked about? Blood and bodies. On the surface, it might seem like Ranni's plan is missing that grim ingredient, right? Well, not exactly. Let's talk about the Eternal Cities. All across these locations we find bodies, lots of them, and they're not just lying around aimlessly, they're often clustered near these huge creatures, which I haven't fully deciphered yet, but we always find them in still water or eerie places. I've got a theory I'm still fleshing out, but hear me out. It seems like the bodies we see scattered across the Eternal Cities very often, if not always, appear near still water. Now, the Eternal Cities are found where ancient rivers used to flow. Did the cities themselves stop the water? We've got hints from sites of grace that shed light on these structures, like the aqueducts clearly diverting the flow of water, or the Ensel River sluice gate and the Noxtella water basin. These locations all represent still stagnant water. Now, you might want to check out my previous video for some context on this, but think about it. What if these ancient rivers were once part of a life-death cycle for an older civilization? Water carrying the bodies of the dead isn't too out there. Plenty of ancient civilizations believe water was a medium to transport the deceased. What if by building these structures the natural cycle was interrupted? The bodies never made their way to the trees to complete the life-death rebirth process, and instead their souls were trapped in these gigantic things we see across the Eternal Cities. Maybe those creatures had a similar purpose as the trees had, to store life for better death. It's just speculation, but so it's almost everything in Elden Ring. And what if these huge creatures then served some purpose for Ranni's Age of the Stars, kickstarting her ascension? It sounds dark, but it would make sense. She needed the souls to fuel her godhood, so here we have soulless bodies and soulless creatures that could have perhaps served as soul-storing devices once upon a time. The one thing that throws me off, though, is that Ranni doesn't use a portal. Could it be that the portal is tied to the Greater Will, or maybe even the Crucible? Maybe the portal's connected to the tree, and since Ranni is bringing about a new age, the Dark Moon, she bypasses the need for the portal entirely. Maybe. Think about it. Ranni's Godhood is one of the few that's not connected to the fingers or the Earth Tree. She's totally separate from the gold and the tree, unlike Miquella, who still had ties to the gold and even his own tree. Maybe Miquella needed the portal as he couldn't pull it off on his own, and after all, Ranni does mend Marika in her ending. Does that link her to the Elden Ring somehow then? And remember when we killed the Elden Beast, it says God slain, and she is able to mend the ring and become a god, replacing the previous one. just like we do if we decide to become Marika's lord and bring on a new age. Marika's already had their bloodshed, we kill the previous god, we keep the Elden Ring, and that's it. Ranni could have been doing the same. But this then brings us to the big question. How is it even possible that Miquella can ascend while Marika, Radagon, and the Elden Beast are still around? Did Miquella just go rogue and make himself into some kind of outer god fully separate? I mean, two gods, because we do have two gods up until we kill Miquella. What's happening there? The more we dig, the more questions keep popping up. It feels like Miquella might have found a loophole, or maybe he was just ambitious enough to create his own path to godhood. There's so much more to uncover about these plans and intentions. And so, after digging through the celestial chaos of Elden Ring, what have we learned about ascension to godhood in the lands between? We've seen that becoming a god isn't just about having the right accessories, like an Elden Ring or a lord. It involves a mysterious 1,000-year journey, blood, sacrifices, and maybe a loophole or two. Miquella, Marika, and Ranni each took different paths to their divine status, each with its own dark twists and turns. Ranni sidestepped traditional paths and used her connections with the Nox to orchestrate a new age, bypassing the need for portals or Elden Rings and perhaps making her ascent the most cunning of all. Miquella's method, while less clear, suggests a mix of ambitions and a desire to break free from established control, potentially creating a new kind of godhood altogether. As we continue to explore these tangled narratives, stay tuned for future videos where we'll dive deeper into the roles of lords, the mysteries of the Elden Beast, and the continuing saga of those divine beings. And if you haven't done so already, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out when I tackle all these mysteries later on. Thanks for watching.